So now we're going to move on to the next layer under the epidermis, which is going to be the dermis. So the dermis, the word derm means skin. Okay, and this is going to be kind of a strong yet flexible connective tissue. Okay, so it's going to be important for it to be very strong, but it's also going to need to be flexible. Okay, in the dermis, you're going to find cells that we've seen before. So you're going to have fibroblasts, you're going to have macrophages, mast cells, and white blood cells. Okay, so I'm going to just put white blood cells. It's also going to have kind of a semi-fluid matrix. Okay, so it's going to have fibers that we'll kind of talk a little bit about. And it's also, basically, it can be described as kind of like pantyhose for the entire body. So it's holding everything together. So binds the entire body together. Okay, and basically, so obviously we wouldn't do this, or you should not, but if you think about leather that we wear from like cows, that is the dermis, okay? And so it would be our kind of leathery layer, sometimes called hide. And so that is the dermis layer, okay? So it's gonna be this tough connective tissue layer that is going to be very important in kind of holding everything in together. Okay, and so I'll kind of hide leather. Okay, so again, when you're wearing leather of a different animal, this is the layer that you're actually wearing. So the dermis is gonna have two layers of it. So dermis layers. So the first layer is going to be the papillary. And then we're going to have the reticular. So we're going to talk a little bit about the papillary, and then we'll talk a little bit about the reticular. The papillary is going to be the more superficial layer. So it's going to be the one that's actually right beneath the epidermis. And then the reticular is going to be beneath the papillary. So it's going to be the deepest layer. All right, so we'll talk a little bit more about the papillary. All right. So the papillary is going to be thin, so it's not very thick, and it's also going to be superficial to the dermis, or superficial layer of the dermis. So it's going to be the one that is the highest. Superficial layer of dermis. Okay, it is going to be made out of areolar connective tissue. And it's going to have fine interlacing collagen and elastic fibers. Okay, so it's going to form kind of a loosely woven mat with kind of many small blood vessels. Okay, and the looseness is important because it allows for phagocytes, okay, and other defensive cells to kind of sneak in and be able to help protect against bacteria. So phagocytes and other defensive cells, like white blood cells, to wander freely. Okay, so look for bacteria. So this is what this is going to be the epidermis. So we're now going to be looking at, this is the epidermal layer. Down here, so this is going to be the actual dermal layers. So right here, we're going to have the papillary dermis. Okay, so the papillary dermis, you're going to see it kind of is going to have these kind of wavy structures with kind of this lowest level of the epidermis. Okay, so let me just put epidermis. Okay, these wavy structures right here are going to be called dermal papillae. So let me write that. Okay, so we have dermal papillae. Okay, so these are peg-like projections from the surface, and they indent the overlaying epidermis. Okay, so again, it kind of looks like this. Okay, so these structures right here on this side would be called the dermal papillae. These structures right here would be called kind of epidermal pegs. Okay, and again, this is going to be that lowest level. So the intersection between the dermal papillae and the epidermal pegs. So this would be where the stratum bacilli is going to be, where we have kind of that lowest level. All right, a little bit more about these dermal papillae. So they're going to have lots of capillaries that are actually located in these regions, so in the peg area. Okay, so many capillaries. Okay, and they're also going to have kind of free nerve endings. And these are going to be pain receptors. Okay, they are sometimes also going to have touch receptors. And these are going to be called, this is an important one, Messenger's corpuscles. Okay, so they are going to be found kind of, if we're looking at this, they would be found in this area. Okay, and this, I'm going to try to show you what when you're looking at the Messenger's corpuscles, they kind of have these, they more look like this, and you'll see these, I don't have a picture printed out here, but you can sometimes kind of like see the nuclei and the edges, but the cells are definitely kind of arranged in this interesting structure. I mainly want to point this out because we're going to talk about Passien's corpuscles, which look very different. They're in the reticular dermis. So if you see a structure kind of in here and we point out to it, it might be a Messenger's corpuscle, okay? Now, one thing I want to mention is that in thick skin, the dermal ridges that are kind of caused by these epidermal ridges will then create the fingerprints on our fingers. And I'm not going to go into it much, but there kind of are different kind of lines on the body. So the fingerprints, but we also have these things called like friction lines that are caused by this kind of wavy structure. And that's genetically kind of inherited. All right. we're now going to move down from the papillary layer and go into the reticular. Okay, so this is going to be this lower level. So you can kind of, it's hard to see a very distinct line, but the main thing is you're going to start to see these kind of thick fibers that are going to be present. So when you see these waves, definitely think papillary, okay? So the reticular layer is going to be kind of the major portion of the dermis. Dermis. Okay, so it's the deeper layer. And it's going to make 80% of the dermis. So most of the dermis is going to be made out of this reticular, okay? It is going to be made out of dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, and it's going to have quite a few different accessory structures. Okay, and so some of these things are going to be hair follicles. We're going to have sebaceous, and sudiferous glands, which we'll talk about later. There are going to be blood vessels. Okay, there are going to be nerves. And one of these types of kind of nerve or associated with nerves are going to be Passion's corpuscle. Okay, and so these are found in the deep regions. And what they do is they detect crude touch. And what that means is it's not like fine touch. It's basically feeling deep pressure because they're low. So there will be other nerve endings that are going to be more fine touch. Okay, and I would definitely know what this is, but when you see them, they look like onions because they have kind of these concentric rings. They're sometimes called lamellar corpuscles. The word lamellar kind of means plate. And so they have this kind of interesting structure where they look like, to me, if you cut an onion kind of straight down its middle, you can see the different rings, okay? All right, so that is the major areas of the actual dermis, okay? So this whole thing is the dermis. We have the epidermis. Dermis, we're gonna have papillary, which is the upper superficial layer. It's gonna have these papillary kind of structures that are going to kind of these waves. They're called papillae. And the reticular layer is gonna have kind of thicker bundles of different tissues that are going to kind of hold it together. All right, so we're now going to talk about kind of some interesting things that have to do with the epidermis and the dermis. The first thing we're going to talk about is skin color. Okay, so what actually determines our skin color? Skin color is very complicated. It has to do with lots of different genes and alleles. But we're just going to basically talk about the pigments that are going to be involved in this. So there's three main pigments, okay, that determine skin color. Okay, and so we're not talking about the genetics of this. We're just talking about like if you have a lot of this pigment, you're going to have this type of skin. Okay, so the first one is going to be melanin. So we've talked about melanin. It's very important. It can kind of give the skin a reddish, yellow, kind of to brownish black color. Okay. It's very important and is going to help prevent UV damage. Okay. And The darker the skin, kind of the more melanin that's produced. So more melanin. So you'll notice that individuals that come from areas that are around the equator or the center of the kind of planet, those areas have really high amounts of sunlight and therefore need to protect their cells from kind of UV damage. And so you're going to tend to see individuals have darker skin that come from those areas, okay? So the reason why they have more melanin that's produced to protect their cells, and it's also stored for longer. Okay, as opposed to individuals that live in areas that don't have quite as much sun. We're going to talk about vitamin D, which is really important with the skin. And so if you're in areas that don't have really high sunlight, you do not want to have tons of melanin because then it would actually hinder kind of the production of vitamin D. Okay, another color pigment is going to be carotene. And you've probably heard of this. This is found in carrots. It is a yellow to orange pigment. Okay, this often is going to accumulate in the stratum corneum. So this is the outer layer. And so this is why oftentimes palms of hands can look kind of a yellowish, or the bottom of your feet, because this is a location where carotene is going to kind of accumulate. And if you have thicker, this is where the thickest skin is, so you have more kind of a thicker layer of the stratum corneum, then it's going to look more yellow. My palms aren't very yellow. My feet are more, but I'm not going to show you my feet. All right. The last pigment is going to be hemoglobin. And you might be like, wait, isn't that just in blood? Well, it turns out that if you have very, very fair skin, so you're very light skinned, so I'm not very light skinned, but you can actually, well, I guess you can kind of see it some. If you can actually see the blood vessels that are beneath, and so you can actually see, I don't know if you guys can see it on this video, but you can see my veins right here. So these are actually, you're seeing darker bluish because this is deoxygenated blood. But kind of if you have very fair skin, the blood that's underneath the skin is actually going to kind of show through. It's almost like it's translucent. So it can affect kind of the color. So you can kind of have this pinkish hue of fair skin. So you imagine that kind of have multiple different genes that are going to be important in these different things. And so kind of the different combination of all of this is then going to kind of create a different type of pigment of your skin. All right, so another kind of thing to do with the skin are going to be hairs. So we're going to talk a little bit about hairs and hair follicles. Okay, so all of this stuff is just kind of a little brief introduction to things, nothing too major that you need to know, just kind of the basics. So one of the main things is hair is mainly dead. Hair is going to be mainly keratinized, dead. This is important. Hair is not really alive. There are parts of the hair that are alive at the very bottom, but most of it is dead. Epithelial cells. Okay, and there are different types of keratin. We're not really going to go into too much information about this, but there's something called soft keratin, and there's something called hard keratin, and this is going to be a type of hard keratin. So it's kind of a tougher. Okay, and so each hair is going to have a kind of shaft and a root. Okay, so we'll kind of start seeing this structure. So the hair that's going to have a shaft, and then we'll have this root or the hair bulb that we'll talk about. There also is going to be a structure called the hair papillae. And that's going to kind of be in this very center part of the hair. And I'm going to show you a picture of this. It's going to be a knot of capillaries that supply nutrients to the growing hair. Okay, so we'll start kind of looking at a hair. So this is what a hair looks like, kind of at the very bottom. And just get rearranged. 1 second. We have kind of, this is going to be this structure right here. This is going to be the hair papillae. Okay, and then this whole kind of part right here is the bulb, kind of the hair bulb. But we also call the base of it it's gonna be the hair root. Okay, so you can hear hair bulb, hair root. All right, so the bulb, which is down here, is going to be, has a kind of, there are nerves that are associated with the bottom of the hair, and they'll actually respond to if the hair is being touched. And so like you can feel if someone's touching your hair. So that's going to be really important. And then kind of the hair follicle is going to be kind of this upper structure, the actual follicle of the hair. So kind of, you can think of it just being the structure of the hair that's going to grow out. It is going to be mainly composed of kind of, let's see, we have stratified squamous. Okay. And you can't see it on this picture, and this is kind of small, but there are muscles that are attached to the actual hair. And these muscles, so it's right here, are called erector pillae muscles. Okay, and so what those erector pillae muscles do is that they're thin, smooth muscle. Okay, so that tells you what type of muscle it is. It is attached to hair shaft. And pulls the hair upright. Okay, when it is contracted. Okay, now we don't have very much body hair, but when you get goosebumps, you're basically having the same sensation of, you know, your hair standing erect. This is really important in other animals. Like if you've ever had your dog or cat that gets scared and their hair like all of a sudden stands up, those are erector pillae muscles. So you can see actual hair follicle in the bulb. And if you see kind of this structure that looks like a muscle, it is, and it's an erector pillae muscle. So make sure that you can kind of identify that. We don't really see it in this image right here, but there can be muscles that are associated with the hairs, okay? So those are gonna be important. And there are different types of hair. Just wanted to kind of mention this. So, and you probably have noticed this, but maybe didn't know what they're called. So types of hair. And one type is called vellus hair. So this is basically soft body hair of children and women, adult females. So this would be kind of like the hairs on your arm and things like that. So it's kind of softer hair. It doesn't grow very long. So that would be that kind. And then the other type is called terminal hair. And that's basically all the other types of hair. So it's coarse, it's longer growing. So this is gonna be what you find on your head. It could be like your eyebrows, pubic hair, all that kind of stuff. And like adult men have this in more locations. That's gonna be called terminal hair, okay? And this will not be on the test or anything, but there's some interesting stuff in the textbook about how your hair, kind of if it's wavy versus straight or coarse, and it has to do with the actual shape of the hair bulb in the follicle. Okay, so kind of the structure will affect how that actually comes out. Now, something similar to hair, I'm just going to briefly describe the nails. So, our fingernails and our toenails. Let me just get a new piece of paper. And nails are going to be, they're made out of hard keratin. Okay, they are there for protection. Okay, so think about it. We don't tend to use our fingernails for protection very much, but if you're trying to fight for your life or something, trying to scratch, that's going to help. But it also just protects the fingertips from damage. So if you're going to be digging in something, it's going to help protect your fingers. Okay. Well, I painted my fingernails, so you can't really see this, but most nails are going to have kind of this white shape right here at the bottom. This is called the lunula. I have no idea how to say it. It's late, sorry. Can't, but the lunula, and that is actually going to sit kind of on the area that's going to be the growth. So nail growth, growth area. Okay, and so not much kind of talking about that. Another structure that we'll talk about are going to be kind of glands. So we have sweat glands. Okay, so these are all, again, accessories to kind of this dermal layer. And we have kind of two different types. The word sweat gland, first of all, we can also use this word sudiferous. Okay, and the reason why I always think of this one is, for some reason, this word makes me think of odor, like body odor, sudiferous. So this is sweat. Okay, so this word sudor means sweat. There are two types. We have one called eccrine. Okay, and so these are sweat glands. They are considered a merocrine gland. When we talked about glands earlier, they secrete. Okay, and they are going to be open to the skin surface. They are important in regulation of body temperature. Okay, you find these mainly on your kind of palms, soles, and forehead. Okay, and they're going to be kind of these simple, coiled, tubular glands. Okay, the secretory part is going to lay actually within the dermis. Okay, so let me just put that. Secretory part lies in dermis. Okay, but the duct, which is going to be kind of the tube, is going to go to the surface of skin. Okay, the main thing about these ones is they do not open, so do not open into hair follicle. Okay, they are going to release sweat, which is mostly water. It's about 99% water, but it also has a little bit of salt. And kind of a very big point of this, I kind of ran out of room, is that these are active in children and adults. Okay, so this is we're gonna talk about a different type that's not active in children, okay? So I'll bring this back out. So here is our we're looking at the integument. We have this eccrine gland, which is going to be in the actual dermis. Okay, so it's lower down. It is going to just go right up into a sweat pore. Okay, when you see pores on your face, those usually are going to be where hairs are coming out of. These are not part of that. So they do not open into kind of an area with a hair associated with it. So this is what this first kind, this eccrine. So we have kind of this coiled tubular, and it's going to open up just directly to the skin surface. All right, so that's the first type. So the eccrine. We then have a second type of sweat glands. And the second type is going to be called apocrine. Sweat gland. Okay, and so these are going to be found in the axillary and anogenital areas. Okay, so your underarms and your genital anal area. Okay, these begin functioning at puberty. So if there's a question asking you about, which of the two sweat glands functions in childhood and adulthood, it definitely will not be the apocrine gland. It's going to be the eccrine, okay? Because these ones do not work and start functioning until you actually hit puberty. Okay, they have nothing to do with, so no effect on temperature. So these are not your kind of standard sweat glands. Okay, they're larger, and I'll show you a picture of that. And they open into a hair follicle. Okay, they are often activated with stress, but we also think that with sexual arousal. Now, there's a lot we don't know about these, but it's possible that they have something to do with pheromones. Pheromones are they're unknown in humans. We're unsure exactly the function of pheromones, but it's a possible that these are going to be associated with that. And they will secrete sweat, but also something else. They're going to do a little bit of fat and protein. So it's kind of a different type. And so this is going to be the apocrine gland right here. So it's larger, it's actually deeper, and it's going to open into an actual hair follicle. Okay, so unlike the eccrine gland, which these ones are always functional, because if you think about it, these are associated with temperature. You need to be able to regulate your temperature at every point of your lifetime. Like there's no part in your life where you don't need to be able to sweat. But if these are not really associated with that, they may act as sexual scent glands, they get stress, things like that. They are going to only be functional after you've hit puberty. Okay, there are other types of glands that we're not really gonna focus on. I'll just mention them very briefly. So like, for example, mammary glands would also be kind of a gland that would be in this dermal area. They do not produce sweat, they'll produce milk, but I'm just gonna mention them this is all I'm gonna say, and kind of move on from there. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, these are not sweat glands. These are going to be kind of a sebaceous gland. So these are also found in the dermis. Okay, and so located in dermis, and they are also associated with hair follicles, and they secrete sebum, which is basically kind of a lubrication of the hair and skin. Okay, and here is kind of a sebaceous gland right here connected. It looks very different from kind of the apocrine and the eccrine gland. So it's kind of more globular. And this is going to be kind of near the hairs. You do not find these on palms or soles, because if you notice, there's no hair that grows on your your palms or the bottom of your feet. So these have to be associated with sebaceous gland hairs, actually. Okay, and here is what it actually looks like. So this is kind of the eccrine gland. You can kind of see how it's all coiled. So this is going to be the sebaceous gland. It is right next to a hair follicle. So you will only see these in hair follicles. You would not see an eccrine gland by a hair follicle. So that could kind of be a, if we're pointing at this and saying, what is this? It should be some hint that this is probably going to be a sebaceous gland. It potentially could also, actually you would not ever say that this is an apocrine gland, because this is, the apocrine glands are usually quite a bit deeper than that, if you look at them, okay? So that is a sebaceous gland and the different glands. All right, so yeah. All right, so I'm gonna finish up with kind of a little bit about just the major functions of skin. And you might think it's weird that I'm waiting to do this until we've actually talked about it, but I can now talk about the different functions and the specific parts of the epidermis and the dermis that are going to be active in those, because you now know, what are these different types of glands and hair follicles and things like that. So the main function, again, is protection. Okay, it's going to protect against chemical barriers, or it's going to act as the chemical barrier. Okay, so there are going to be kind of secretions that we just talked about that are released. Those tend to have a low pH, which helps kind of keep lots of bacteria at bay. So we are covered in bacteria, but the chemical barriers kind of help prevent overgrowth of those bacteria. Some specific secretions that we will actually have are going to be, this is germicidin. Okay, this is found in sweat. And you don't need to know these for the test. I'm just going to mention them. Another one is called bactericidal, and this is in sebum. Okay. These two things will kill bacteria. Okay, we also have something called defensins. I think I have too many S's. Wait, sorry. D-E-F-E. S-I-N-S. There we go. It's just a natural antibiotic. Okay, and then we also have melanin, which is going to help prevent, UV damage. So that is a chemical barrier. It's a physical barrier. Okay, so it's going to help prevent kind of things from getting in. And also is going to act as a biological barrier in the sense that there are these cells that are going to help kind of be important in that. So we're going to have dendritic cells. Okay, so those are going to be immune cells basically. And then we have germal macrophages. Okay, so both of these are going to be helping protect against invaders getting into the skin. Okay, so these are kind of the major protection. Chemical barriers, physical, and biological. Now, apart from protection, there are other things that the skin does. One of them is going to be body temperature regulation. Okay, and so the skin is going to be really important in trying to help maintain body temperature. And just I just wanted to kind of talk about how, like, if you get too hot, your body is going to sweat. So high temperatures, you're going to sweat, which is important. And if you get something like hypothermia, the body is going to then kind of retract the blood from the surface of the skin, kind of hold it in. So this means you're cold. So lower body temperature. It's going to then help kind of move the blood to where it's actually needed. So if you've ever been really cold, you notice that kind of your external extremities, like your fingers and your toes, start to lose feeling. And that's because your body is determining that those are less important than things like your internal organs. And so in hypothermia, when your body is getting too cold, the skin will actually act in that as well. Okay, so instead of sweating, the main thing that's going to happen is that you'll have kind of the blood that's going to kind of move away from the surface of the actual skin and move towards locations that are more important. All right, when we have kind of on top of body temperature, we're going to have cutaneous sensations, which basically just means that we are able to feel things, pain and things like that. So we have different types of corpuscles. We have Messenger's corpuscles. Okay, so these are sensory nerve endings. Oops. Okay, we have Passion's corpuscles. These are going to sense deep pressure. We have hair follicle receptors. And we have free nerve endings. Okay, so those are all going to feel pain. These ones are usually associated with pain. But they're all going to be important in our sensations, okay? Another really important function of the skin has to do with kind of metabolic functions. Okay, and so you can kind of think of the skin as a chemical factory that is powered by the sun. Okay, and so I'm not talking about chloroplast because I feel like you may have heard something very similar to that. So this has nothing to do with energy production, but this mainly has to do with vitamin D, okay? And so when sunlight kind of bombards the skin, and it's important that we have to have sunlight. We get way too much, but you have to have some. So when the sunlight bombards skin, cholesterol is converted to a vitamin D precursor. So it's not quite vitamin D yet. That vitamin D precursor then goes, kind of is transported in the blood. To different regions of the body that can convert it. So convert it to vitamin D, okay? Now, vitamin D is really important in calcium metabolism. So let's put vitamin. Okay, so important in calcium metabolism. Okay, mainly what happens is that calcium, and I'll just put, I guess it's not an ion. Calcium can't be absorbed in the digestive tract, without vitamin D. Okay, so if you have no vitamin D, you can't actually absorb calcium. And then the skin can do additional kind of chemical conversions. We won't go into any details. The vitamin D one is mainly what you need to know about. Skin makes chemical conversions. Okay. An additional function is that we are going to kind of have the skin is going to act as a blood reservoir. So the dermal vascularization, or vascular supply, accounts for about 5% of total blood. Okay, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is actually going to be really important. Okay, so it's going to help during times where, you know, maybe you're doing something athletic and you need more blood and muscles. So the blood that is kind of contained within the skin can actually go to those areas. The last major function of the skin is going to be excretion. Okay, and so we get rid of sweat, but sweat can sometimes is going to have nitrogen containing kind of waste. So this is one way that we actually will remove some nitrogen containing waste. Okay, and so those are kind of the main functions of the skin. The last two things I'm going to talk about are some issues that can arise with the skin. The first is going to be skin cancer, and I'm not going to go into much detail about skin cancer. You can look online about these different types, but mainly skin cancer it's very common, and it mainly is going to be caused by exposure to UV radiation, really high amounts. Okay, so more. That's why it's important to wear sunscreen. Okay, so what it does is it damages the DNA bases, okay? And that, you know, obviously a mutation can cause cancer, but one of the things it also does is it disables tumor suppressor genes. Okay, and so what's really bad is that the skin has cells that are really good at reproducing. They, you know, we have these stem cells, and so they're very good at being able to do mitosis and renew themselves. The tumor suppressor genes are often very important in the cell cycle, so cell cycle regulation. And if anything happens to the cell cycle regulation, then cancer is one of the results that can happen. So there are three types of skin cancer. We have something called basal cell carcinoma. This is a very common type, and it's the least malignant, so it's usually very curable as long as you are getting checked often. Okay, so most common. And one important thing to know is that it doesn't matter what color skin you have. People with darker skin with more melanin tend to not get skin cancer at higher rates, but it often can be more deadly because they're not getting their skin checked. And so it is important to always go, if like you see something weird that's starting to form on your skin, you get it checked, regardless of what your skin color is. Okay, and from the name, this is going to take place, kind of the cells in the stratum bacilli, okay, are going to be the ones that are having the issues. The next kind is squamous cell carcinoma. This is when the keratinocytes, which, sorry, I've said that word so many different ways, which is mainly going to be in the stratum spinosum. Okay. So these ones are going to be more like those stem cells, and then these are going to be kind of once they're keratinocytes. Okay, and the last most dangerous is melanoma. Okay, these are going to affect the melanocytes. It's very dangerous because it is the most likely to metastasize, which means move to other parts of the body, which is more dangerous. So like it could travel to different parts of your body, including different organs. So this one is very dangerous, okay? And in the textbook and also online, you can look at the different types and things that you need to look out for with this. If you have skin cancer that runs in the family, it's something that you'd want to get checked. So I like to get checked every year or so at the dermatologist. And if anything changes, you do want to get checked soon. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about is burns. So this is when the skin actually is going to be damaged by kind of fire. So this causes tissue damage. And one of the most dangerous parts of burns is that you are going to lose loss of body fluids containing, essential proteins and electrolytes. Okay, so this can cause dehydration. It can cause electrolyte imbalance. So, you have to have your ions and electrolytes. Really, it's important to have those in the right quantity so that your body's able to do its normal functions. Having potassium, having calcium, having sodium and things like that. That can lead to kidney failure. And then something called circulatory shock, which basically what this is that you have inadequate blood circulation due to reduced blood volume. Okay, so that is very dangerous. So this is kind of when you get burned, if it's severe enough, this is what we're actually most worried about. Okay, now there are different types of burns that you've probably heard of. So we have first degree burns. So I'm just going to use that as a degree. First degree. And I think most people have had first degree burns at some point. And this is when only the epidermis is damaged. So if you've ever burned yourself when you're curling your hair or straight ironing your hair or cooking, get bumped by like a cookie pan or something like that, usually that's going to be only the epidermis. It can really hurt and it can cause kind of damage to the skin, and you can get usually some type of scar. I feel like you probably can't see that, but I've burned myself multiple times with curling irons, and it often will just kind of cause a little bit of a damage on your skin. Really kind of sunburns can be first degree burns. So they can be pretty damaging. Second-degree burns are going to injure the epidermis and upper region of the dermis. So this is going deeper. You often will have blisters at this point, and can be kind of more severe and more painful. All right, third-degree burns, which are going to be the worst ones, are going to burn entire thickness of the skin. Okay, so that's really bad. Now, when they're trying to kind of classify burns, they are mainly going to be looking at kind of the depth of the burn. So obviously third-degree burns are going to be the worst. And then also the total percentage of your body that has been burned. Okay, so to have something, so let me just write that here. So the depth of burn is important to know, and also kind of the percentage of body burned. Okay, so critical burns, so these ones are the ones that they're very worried about, specifically for kind of all of this stuff, the circulatory shock and things like that. Those are going to mean that you have 25% of your body with second-degree burns. Okay, so you don't even have to get third-degree burns, but if it's more than, 25% of your body, that's going to be critical. If there's 10% of your body with third-degree burns, okay, so third-degree burns are obviously much more damaging and critical. You only have to have 10% of your body have a third-degree burn for it to be considered critical. And then third-degree burns, it could be less than 10%, but if it's burns on the face, hands, or feet, those are more critical. The reason why the face is so important is because you can have burned respiratory passageways. And I was looking up hands and feet. The book did not go into much detail about why the hands and feet are so dangerous to have third-degree burns on. If anyone knows, maybe you could share that with us and I can share it out. I was Googling it and I couldn't really find why the hands and the feet were so critical. I mean, other than we know that they're super important and like our hands are essential for us. So that could be, but I understand the face one because you're burning your respiratory passage. Just a little bit about how they kind of look at the body, and they call this the rule of nines. So different areas of the body kind of account for what they consider 9% of the body. So like your leg could be 9%, other leg on, kind of on the front is 9%, on the back is 9%. And so they can kind of calculate the percentage of the body that has been burned based on the different regions. So, the front of the arm is 4.5%. But if you look on the back, then that would equal 18%. I'm not going to ask you about this, but basically they can kind of just figure out, do you have 25% of your body with 2% burn? So they would kind of add these different regions up. Okay, and so that is going to be the end of the material that's going to be on the next test, the lecture exam. So just a little reminder, the lecture exam is going to be, I'm going to lecture exam, I'm going to post and make available on Wednesday, but you have to take it by Friday, okay? It is timed, so once you start it, you have to take it in its entirety, okay? I would ask that you please do not look at your notes, specifically for lots of you that want to go into med school, into nursing school. Kind of cheating at this point is going to not help you in the long run because it's going to catch up at some point. So you really want to kind of take this seriously, use your notes, and make sure that you actually know this material so that in the future, when you need to refer back to what you've learned here, you actually remember it and not just, wrote it on a piece of paper. Okay, any questions, make sure you email me. And again, I'm going to have office hours Monday and Wednesday, they're going to be Zoom office hours. They're going to be from 1:30 to 2:30. So if you go to the module, it has a Zoom link. And if you press on the Zoom link, it should take you to my Zoom account. And I'm just going to have it open and I'll be sitting there ready to take questions if you are needing to have anything answered. If this doesn't work for you, no problem. Email me and I could set up a Zoom meeting with you. I'll just send you a link and you'll press on it and we'll decide when that should be. All right, thank you.